Hello, everyone. Good morning to everyone who has joined us today. Thrilled to have you here at today's webinar, which is all about unveiling Britain's fraud landscape and really understand how we can harness maybe human-machine harmony to combat scams. And we've got a brilliant panel for you today to hopefully lead some really, really interesting and engaging conversations around this topic. First of all, let's start with a round of introductions before we dive into the topics. First and foremost, I'm your moderator for today. My name is Ellie Burns and I'm head of product and customer marketing at ID Now. Let's have some introductions for our panel, starting with Ash, then Peter, and then to the ID Now guys.
Cool. Hey, everybody. So I'm Ash. I'm a senior fin crime manager over at Monzo Bank. I cover everything in the business banking space specifically, but I've also worked in the retail bank. And I'm also, unfortunately, in charge of both SARS and sanctions at Monzo. So big life. Peter, I think you're next.
I'm Peter Taylor. I'm also known as the fraud guy. I primarily at this time do research into organised crime and provide consultancy in the field of fraud prevention. Previously a CID officer and director of fraud management for various UK institutions.
Good morning, Ellie, and good morning to all of you. I'm Grigori, the regional head of sales at ID Now, and I have a nearly decade of experience in AML fraud compliance, and I'm really excited to chat with you today. Thanks.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Nitesh Nahta, working for ID Now for over 2 years, responsible for one of our key product, video identification. So basically helping our customers with online KYC and also fighting fraud. Quite passionate about the fraud topic because it's the most important topic for us as we provide services to all the financial institutions to really stop the fraud from happening. So happy to be part of the panel here and looking forward to a wonderful discussion.
Awesome, thank you. And to everyone who's joined, if you have a question, please pop it in the chat and we'll dedicate at least 10-15 minutes to questions at the end. So without further ado, let's dive into this conversation because I think we could speak for hours about fraud. But let's kick off with you, Ash. And this is a wide sort of question, but we're seeing in the UK fraud proliferate. It's costing billions and billions and billions of pounds. There doesn't seem to be an area that's safe from fraudsters. So I suppose to kick things off, why do you think that fraud is so prolific in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, because it's easy to execute, right? Like it's an incredibly sad state of affairs, but I think the UK is uniquely positioned in terms of its reliance on faster payments. That's one of the reasons why fraud has become so prolific here. You send a payment and it's with the other person or party within 3 to 4 seconds. That doesn't allow a lot of intervention time on the banking side to work out whether something has gone wrong or not. I think that's a big part of it. I think there are secondary reasons as well, though. Our education relating to finance and fraud has not been particularly good over an extended period. It's also true in the country that I come from, which is Ireland next door. If we don't continue to educate people significantly in the space, they are not well set up to protect themselves. And they tend to try and rely then on banks when banks are actually sort of the last line of defense in relation to fraud. And I guess there's a third aspect there as well, which is kind of interesting in the space in that we expect fraudsters to be criminalized, but it doesn't really happen. It's a particularly notable kind of effect of fraud in the UK. If you conduct fraud, if you execute it quite successfully, you're very unlikely to see a prison cell or a hefty fine. And I think that also means that it's quite a good and successful business model for fraudsters to execute on, which is really quite unfortunate.
And is that why, Peter, why fraudsters think the UK is such an attractive target to repeatedly hit this aspect that they don't get any consequences, they don't put in prison?
Yeah, the way it was explained to me were by the leader of an organised cybercrime gang, one of the first ones, called Shadow Crew, that when he was committing lots of fraud and making lots of money, as were his gang, he knew it was inevitable that somebody would come knocking. He accepted that would that would happen at some stage. No one came knocking, so everything carried on. I mean, eventually somebody did come knocking, but it took a hell of a long time. And I think most of the criminals are they've become more blatant anyway over the last 5 years. But yeah, nobody coming knocking is certainly a factor. UK is so attractive because 98% of its population are accessible via the internet. So another word for accessible could be fraudable via the internet. But the other one that we've got to be honest about is Britain, and the UK has long been known as the butler of the world for things like money laundering and fraud. We're very good at working with other countries and helping them get their money out of their country and into ours, perhaps. I'll say the word allegedly there. So there are long established trade routes going back, for a long time of fraud in the UK. One thing that is missed from my research with organised cybercrime gangs as well, somebody said that 70% of UK fraud happens abroad. The offenders are abroad, but 30% are in the UK. But our guys in the UK are attacking everybody else as well. So whenever you see any of the cybercrime gangs brought down, the National Crime Agency there, Britain's National Crime Agency, they're arresting people at British airports getting ready to escape the country. So UK citizens or people living in the UK are heavily involved in committing the fraud. So, and they will work nowadays, they'll work with people from any country. We all collaborate fantastically when it comes to fraud. So yeah, we are a hotbed of fraud.
Is there a particular attack or sort of typology that they sort of lean on in the UK as opposed to elsewhere? Is there like a sweet spot they just keep on hitting in the UK?
It's hard to say that because the whole broad brush, banking fraud, romance fraud, insurance fraud, investment fraud, grants fraud, loans fraud, tax refund fraud, staged accident crash for cash fraud. I mean, I'm saying all those, and they're all familiar to most of us that are actually interested. So we're kind of like, we're busy, we're industrious, and the fraudsters are. I mean, obviously, one of the reasons for it is the fact that you can access nearly all the population via the internet, and that's not true in all countries. There are countries that have a higher, use of the internet. But as well as that, there's a lot of people with assets, pensions. The fact that we buy houses. A lot of countries, people don't buy houses; they rent. So yeah, we're a really good target for foreign fraudsters as well as for English fraudsters. But the other one is they're all working together anyway. So if you look at, I mentioned Shadow Crew again. I did a lot of research with a chap called Brett Johnson, who's known as the Internet Godfather, who's a reform fraudster, now works with the good guys. But his gang, Shadow Crew, was the first global cybercrime gang. And initially they were ignored because they weren't worth bothering about, because they were just doing carding fraud. But then they started to work with East Europeans and former Soviet Union countries. So then people like the FBI and the US Secret Service got interested because they saw that as a risk to the dollar. But when I looked at his gang, they were Americans, yeah, and somebody from Scotland. So we're in there all the time. We're always popping up. It isn't the hoodie in a basement in Lithuania. It's a guy in Essex or a guy in Liverpool. And obviously the skills involved as well. So I think we kind of like turn a blind eye to the criminality that's going on in the UK.
And sorry,
yeah, I guess there's just kind of a follow-up there from the bank side. One of the things that we've started to see a lot of, and it makes me doubt this concept of red flags. I think in financial crime and fraud, you're often taught about red flags. Look for the red flag will be there. It will, but if you're only looking for that one red flag, I think it's very possible to miss 5 or 6 others. We've certainly seen organised crime groups recently that are heavily invested in multiple types of fraud. So they might all be account takeover, authorized push payment frauds. But as Peter said, I've seen people execute investment frauds, romance scams, all in exactly the same kind of setup. They don't particularly care what the fraud needs to be. They just care about getting the money in the end, right? So it's becoming less common now to see an offender commit one type of fraud. Very easy to change a script in order to kind of move your dial a little bit and commit 5 or 6 of them at once. So if you're only looking for one, you're going to miss a lot of what's going on in the periphery that you weren't looking for in the first place. And that's definitely made the threat a little bit harder to spot.
And Grigori and Nitesh, we're sort of on the defense side. We're the ones that are building the KYC and AML defenses to try and stop this fraud getting through. And I know that we work in places like Germany and France, which is maybe a bit more regulated. What are the are these the same challenges we've heard from Ash and Peter? Are you hearing sort of this concern about organized crime, and what are the weak areas? Why aren't these KYC controls working?
Sure, Ellie. So the main challenges our customers are dealing with, specifically in the UK, this identity fraud. So fraudsters using stolen or fake identities to open or get loans, to open accounts or get loans. This is synthetic identities, of course, mixing real and fake information to create identities that are hard to detect. APP scams, so when somebody is tricked into sending money to a scammer pretending to be a legitimate person, and obviously regulatory pressure. So strict KYC AML rules mean financial institutions have to verify identities more accurately and quickly. And very last and probably very loud thing that we hear at the moment is the implementation of APP fraud reimbursement in October. So that's what we hear from the customers in the UK.
And in Germany, they have video and they have BaFin and GWG, which is very highly regulated. Are you seeing, is it a case that, UK, it doesn't have that regulatory landscape? That means it's easier. Where do you see the difference between the UK and the Germany when you're talking to customers?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few areas. I mean, I think the big thing when I started to interact with our UK team a couple of years ago, and understanding how and what kind of security checks are in place when the banks are onboarding new customers, it's quite different from Germany. So in Germany, it's not like they don't allow automated checks. They do allow, but if you look at the banks and when we talk to our customers. They not only consider or they not only prefer video identification, which is basically which offers layers of security. So when you first scan the document, there is already a layer of AI which checks against these synthetic frauds like the one that Gregory just described. And then immediately you go to the first level of defense, which is the agent who's an expert, as we call them. They are really trained, like on a daily basis, they go through certain training, like, okay, what were the frauds we have seen until yesterday? So it's like always on top of it. And then when they see there is a suspicious activity, then they flag it to the supervisor. So even they are even more trained. And then the supervisor will document the whole thing, and then it goes to the bank. So it's like the fourth level layer of security. So that's something very common in Germany. So even though sometimes it can become expensive, the type of checks that we offer through video identification, but banks opt for it all the time. And there are some banks which are like really the neo banks, we call them. They want like lots of traction. They have lots of traction in the market, lots of new customers, new like foreign expats, and these people like youngsters, they want to open accounts with them. And then there was a time a couple of years ago that they opened too many accounts. BaFin came in and started to look at their identification. They said, guys, you're opening accounts too fast. This cannot happen. You need to put more checks and balances. So, and that's when we start to see these banks even asking for more from us, not only a simple regimented video identification process, but also things like social security questions. So social engineering questions, sorry. So basically the agent or the expert is checking or asking questions to this person. Are you opening this account because things like you have been socially engineered, or things like money mules? There are people, as Gregory described, like they don't know what they're doing, or maybe in some cases they know what they're doing. They just want to move money from here to there, and they just want to open as many accounts as possible. And these things are really, really hard to detect with technology. And that's our experience of last 10 years. And that's the reason that video identification or the expert-based identification in Germany is the key. And even we are seeing a lot of changes in the regulation now being proposed by the by the regulators here, the German Financial Authority, as well as at the EU level. Still, banks, when we talk to them, they said, no, we want an expert to come in and check it, because the risk is just too high, letting somebody enter the system. And then it's really, really hard for these banks to explain to the authorities, and sometimes even their licenses can get canceled. So I think that the risk is too high for these people to open the accounts, and I think that's the stark difference that I see between UK and Germany.
That's really interesting, this face-to-face aspect, because in the UK, obviously, we're seeing bank branches, physical brick and mortar branches closing at a rate of knots. And this was, my mum over the weekend got scammed, and then she was panicking for at least 2 hours because there wasn't a physical branch that she could go into and speak to a human being in her town. So I suppose, Peter, with the closing down of the branches and with this, removal of this face-to-face, that human element in the system, does that expose UK consumers to more fraud? What do you think about that?
It's a difficult one, really. If you restrict access, if you force people into using online all the time, then you're going to get more cybercrime. So a bit of a rhyme or a rap there. There's been quite a few events where branch staff or counter staff have intervened and stopped frauds. Even things like fellow customers. There's a lovely one with a taxi driver who was taking a woman to a branch, and she ended up telling him that she'd been told to go to not to go to her own branch, but to go to another town because the bank staff were in on it. And he just intervened, and he took her into the branch and explained to the branch staff that she was obviously, a victim of fraud. So yeah, you do lose some stuff. I try and sort of be forward thinking as well, and some things are inevitable, and the closing of branches, if you look 20 years in the future, it's inevitable there will be less branches rather than more, unless it's a major policy change. So the only opportunity I can see out of that is to actually use, to actually build into your defences the fact that less people are going to be able to go online. But I think we need better alternatives for how you can contact your bank. If you think you're a victim of fraud, I think the current system, as you said, Ash, it is overwhelmed. But I think maybe there's a better way. But I think everybody's learning that Action Fraud is going through major changes, and I've got changes I expect to see that will actually make Action Fraud better. And same with policing, and that and also allow different routes for different people. So if you've got somebody like me and I've got a minor fraud to report, I would rather just go online and chat to a bot that actually understood. I'd rather do that than hang on and speak to a person. But then you've got other people that would rather speak to a person. And then you've got circumstances where you need to speak to a person, and that's a big kick in with AI. Because the truth of the matter is press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or select option 1. You're giving people 5 options, and your mum would probably have been option 6, whereas AI can give us so many more ways that people can actually. It's nowhere near as limited as what we've been using for the last sort of 20 years. So AI can help us there and will help us there. So I think it is inevitable, but in the short term, it probably will make some people more vulnerable to fraud. The only thing I'm going to say to the banks is I don't go in branches often, but when I do, they're absolutely jam packed, and you still close them down.
Yeah. And Ash, you come from a digital only bank. So how do you balance this sort of giving that customer personalized experience whilst having not a physical area and having that reliance on AI for things like fraud?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard balance to strike, right? I think We're only kind of 10 years into the big neobank surge in the UK. Obviously, banks like mine, like Monzo, Starling, Tide, all of these banks arrived in a moment when innovation was really desperately needed and some sense of creativity was desperately needed. But in introducing that model, I think that all of our digital based banks introduced an element that speed was excellent. And while speed is great, it comes with the significant challenge of, do you know enough about your customer? And does your customer now in 2024, are a lot of our customers living in a world where they think everything needs to take 3 seconds? And the idea of your bank account being blocked or frozen while we work out if what you're doing is kosher or not, they seem to see that as a bit of an assault, when actually, generally speaking, we are trying to help and we have a legal obligation to try to help. And I think the innovation that's happened in the digital bank space has almost produced this need for speed that's really not servicing anyone. It's not servicing the banks well because the pressure we've put on ourselves is absolutely unbelievable. And it's not serving the customer well because they've come to anticipate or require a level of service that is not in their best interest. So I think we've kind of hit this rocket trajectory, and we need to find a balance back at center where we do spend a little bit more time with our customer, comprehending what it is that they're really about, what they're trying to do with their account, what we expect and anticipate from them. And equally, they need to understand that when we block their account, it's not because we think you're, a dirty criminal who needs to be in prison. It's because we're trying to help you. We're trying to understand whether or not you are vulnerable to either committing a crime out of some sense of desperation, and that understanding is definitely strong within the bank sector, or whether you're vulnerable to having the crime committed upon you for very similar reasons. And I think that's probably where that balance needs to emerge. If you're in a digital bank only space, a lot of our time now is spent on trying to work out the best ways to help customers. I think if you're not going to have that face-to-face connection, you need to be able to back it up with more information, more knowledge, a softer touch with your customer, a more pleasant tone that goes along with them so that you can deliver them the best service possible in the best ways possible. And I think there's kind of a toss up there. It really depends which bank model you've chosen. Certainly bank branches are not infallible either, right? There are certainly horrible situations that have happened in there. A lot of the NatWest money laundering scam happened large scale in a bank branch, right, where millions and millions of pounds in cash was laundered through one bank branch. And I think that speaks to the fact that our weakest link is the people that are involved, and that includes both the customer and our staff. So trying to find this balance in the middle is critical, and we are not there yet. I don't think there's a single bank that could truly say, we're there, we get it, we're mature enough. It's not there. Every bank needs to do an adjustment either up and down in terms of how they're choosing to do things right now.
Awesome. And going to Nitesh and Grigori, this sort of concept of good friction, not having that full reliance on AI. Why would that be important? Why would the argument be that we shouldn't have full reliance on AI? Can you explain how it works? What the challenge is? Nitesh?
Yeah. So, I mean, I also wanted to respond to what Ash said, like the digital-only banks. So we also have quite a few digital-only banks in Germany, and there we see exactly this. Like the faster onboarding is the key. The speed is the key because they are digital-only. They're supposed to be fast, right? 3 seconds, 2 seconds. But at the same time, we really work closely with these banks, and I think they've realized that they can use the vast amount of resources that we have that have been trained over 10 years. Like we have quality management team, we have fraud prevention team, we monitor these KPIs day in, day out. And we collect samples of these identifications, and this team is analyzing them on a daily basis. And we call out things where we see, okay, the quality wasn't enough. And this is where we can really back up these digital only banks by providing this infrastructure and really stop the frauds right from the get-go. And to answer your question, Ellie, the thing is, lots of these frauds, I think there are two types of frauds that are happening. Like one is these really innocent frauds, which is social engineering type of frauds. And the other ones are like these money mules, which are not innocent, but like really thought through type of frauds, and where the humans are involved, right? So it's really hard for any technology to figure out what's happening because everything is genuine. They are not using fake identification, fake IDs or anything. Person are real, the IDs are real, right? But the situation that they are put in are basically inclined towards creating or causing fraud. But then there are AI-based fraud, for example, deepfakes and these things. And there we really see with the last 10 years of experience that the combination of human and machine is super critical. There are certain things which are, for example, deepfakes and really sophisticated level of deepfakes, be it a document deepfake, be it a person deepfake, because that's like the two different things that you would see with these identification. And some of these can be definitely detected by the technology, but some of it cannot. And then we have, like, every year we spend quite a bit of money to really to run audits on our system by third-party agencies who are checking against these deepfakes, both types of deepfakes. And there you see, sometimes it's really also difficult for even humans to figure out. But if you have a combination of human and technology, so technology is doing the pre-screening, checking if it's really a synthetic document or a synthetic identity or a person injecting a video or presentation attack or these kind of things. And when the human comes in, they get this alert on their dashboard that, yes, they see some sort of suspicion going on. Maybe there are third-party indicators. For example, there's somebody in the room, they are cueing the person, okay, you should answer this way, or maybe there's another device in the room that they are looking at the TAN code, and the agents are trained to look for these cues. And all of this happens in these 3 to 5 minutes. And the agents, without even telling the person, are clicking a button saying, hey, we noticed some suspicious behavior. We don't think it's proper fraud, but maybe there is a suspicion. So the banks need to then decide if they want to allow this person. They can go through the entire video recording, the discussion between the agent and the user who's trying to onboard. So it's really a combination of these two. And that's what we see in Germany to really prevent. And that's why we see our FAR as an FRR, basically, for people who don't know FAR and FRR. Basically, it's fraud acceptance rate. So you basically accepted something that was fraud. And then fraud rejection rates, which is basically you're not supposed to reject it, but you rejected it because the person thought it was fraud. And we really keep these numbers at, like, really bare minimal by constantly training our systems, AI systems, and the humans together. And that's, I'm in my mind, I think that's the way to go forward in future.
What we're coming back to here is that layered approach. You know, that it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And the other one objective you've got to keep in fraud is minimizing disruption for genuine customers and genuine people. And you can only deliver that through a layered approach, you know, which, as you've said now, is, you know, if, you know, that's okay for 90% of people, and then that 10%, they need some more attention, and then maybe 2% need some more attention. Obviously, those numbers can vary. I'm kind of using insurance claims numbers because that's what I spent most of my career. But it is the layered approach. So everything does have to be layered. It's important that we do actually build that in. And I'm always reluctant when somebody says, you know, there's just one layer and it's going to sort out everything. No, it's not. It's going to create a load of false positives, or it's going to upset good people, you know. So I think that's the thing we've got to remember as well as fraud. We don't exist. There's no point of us if there isn't good commerce. Yeah. If there aren't sales, you know, we are. So sometimes I find with people that are involved in fraud, they get obsessed that it's all about the fraud. And the analogy I use is we're the tail on the dog. Yeah, the dog is the business, the organization, the commerciality, and without the dog, you don't need a tail. But a dog without a tail can be downright unpleasant. Yeah. So,
and interesting, this human element. And I'd like to ask Ash and Peter, have you got an example of any situation where that human element would have helped in a fraud attack or a situation that you've come across? Because it comes to my mind, you know, we've seen this in the UK, so it's not a direct parallel, but the Horizon post office scandal, that was only sort of brought to the fore because a human saw that the system was wrong. So have you got any examples where this injection of a human element, human eyes on the target would have helped you? Starting with Ash.
Yeah, I mean, because I run financial crime for the business bank at Monzo, I won't say it's frequent, but we do certainly see where human interaction helps us hugely in business banking. So it's quite common in the UK for an organized crime group, that's new, for an organized crime group to incorporate, say, 400 or 500 different companies, all at similar addresses or within the same postcode, with some trends in naming conventions. And if you have an automated system that can pick out, oh, your company X that you've onboarded that you think has conducted some suspicious activity actually has a connection to 400 other companies incorporated on the same day in roughly the same location, that gives you a sense of a network analysis. You can make an automated system stick its hand in the air and say, hi, that's a network, but it's not going to tell you the finer detail of what the network's doing it, how it's doing it, what it's carrying out, what its overall goals are, how much cash is being moved. All of those elements need to come from a human being. A human needs to sit there and look at it and say, how did the scam start? What exactly is going on here? How are we connecting the dots between people? Can we work out who the kingpin is at the center? So your automated system can take you so far. It can give you a lot of information that's contextual and background, but fundamentally you need a person to connect the dots between 400 to 500 companies. You need someone who can look at them and say, okay, I've made sense of it now, and I understand that it's a large scale invoice financing fraud or similar, right? Pick your poison on the list of frauds. But that element of the person who maybe has the benefit of 80% of the work done for them through automation, their 20% is the gold. Their 20% is what's going to unlock a full organized crime ring. And that information can then get handed over to law enforcement who can follow through on it. If I hand law enforcement 4% of the information that came through an automated system, they're not going to be able to connect those dots any easier than I am. And frankly, they're less resourced to do so. So there's definitely an element of automation playing a big role, but the human being with the expertise on top is incredibly important to actually say, I understand exactly what's going on. It's no longer a question of red flags. There are X, Y, and Z factors that I know for sure with certainty this is a crime and here's the evidence. That's what's needed. That's what a person can deliver that an automated system just can't.
I can think of lots of examples where the human has spotted the fraud. In fact, one of the best fraud indicators is somebody didn't like the look of it. You know, and what fraudsters do is they shape themselves to look like a genuine customer. And they're actually better at looking like a genuine customer than a genuine customer, because a genuine customer will make mistakes and errors and things like that on an application. So the human element's very, very good there. But you mentioned the post office. As a very experienced detective for a long time, whose father was a postmaster, I've been interested in the case. And what we've got here with post office, just for anybody who isn't aware, and I hope you're really comfy in your cave, the post office, basically the Horizon system said that money was going missing from these post offices. Yeah. The Post Office Investigations Department, which is the oldest criminal investigations department in the world, they had the CID long before the police, investigated it, and these people were found guilty or forced to resign, repay the money and everything else. And many, many years ago, my question looking at, when I started looking at the cases, is, but every detective asks for fraud and lots of other crime, is follow the money. Where did the money go? And the thing that struck me is when you read they are the victims now, the postmasters that were wrongly convicted, and there's no doubt they were wrongly convicted. They're supposedly taken 30 grand, 50 grand, 13 grand, or whatever. Where was that money? Because most of the ones that I saw paid it back or were forced to pay it back, they had really strict contracts with the post office, were remortgaging the houses, were selling the houses. You know, they were really struggling to pay it back. But they wouldn't have been, you know, some of them, it would have been very easy. That 50 grand they've got stashed away, I better give it back, like people do with, you know, with tax evasion. You know, they avoid £2 million tax, but they've got it, you know, so they pay it back and hope they won't go to prison. So, yeah, it needed, what I don't get is why there wasn't some human in there. Like, there probably was, and they probably got told to shut up, mind their own business and carry on taking the bonus. But, you know, why didn't somebody say, well, where's the money? You know, we've already had a good example with this, if the reports are true, with the Department of Work and Pensions. They put an AI fraud detection system on benefits claimants. It started to pick people out. So the people that are identified as being suspicious or whatever, their benefits were stopped. The feedback then was a lot of the people that were claimants were saying, you're wrong. But even DWP investigators were saying, you're wrong. It's not 100% working. I think obviously they were mindful of what had gone on within the post office. And the DWP changed their policy. So now if you are marked as suspicious by the AI system, then they look at it. But while they're looking at it and reviewing it, your benefits still continue. Unless there are other reasons to stop your benefits, such as you're not cooperating or the evidence is overwhelming. So we've already seen it took humans to say, we're not sure about this. You know, that you've actually got to listen, you know, to obviously the people that are being accused. But when you've actually got your own investigators saying, this doesn't ring right with me, you know, then, you know, credit to the DWP, they actually listened. And it's a shame that the post office didn't do that.
Yeah, you see this in banks also, right? Like this has been in as much as we would all say, I want the human to be involved, I think the human has an awful lot to add. There are two problems with that. And one is the one that Peter's mentioned. Someone puts their hand up and sometimes they get told to shut up. That's why a lot of our financial regulators now are very interested in tone from the top and culture when it comes to fraud and financial crime controls. I think the kind of most pressing example of that in banks in recent history is the Madoff scandal, where Madoff had so many accounts being run through JP Morgan Chase. And because he was known to bankers in the bank, they genuinely didn't question a huge amount of what his activity was. There was a sort of automatic acceptance that, oh, it's Madoff, so that's okay. And that sense of almost a fake sense of security can certainly scupper all of us, right? Nobody at JP Morgan Chase set out to commit a crime. That's not what happened. It's that people became comfortable. They started to accept as given facts that were actually very questionable. So as much as we all say, the person is really needed to be involved, that person also needs checks and balances, right? That's why we do need second sets of eyes on things. It's why we need to separate out parts of our functions, almost like a separation of powers. That still needs to happen if you introduce AI, if you're still going to rely on a human, because we are functionally fallible as well, both from a moral and a technical perspective. Of course, we will make mistakes.
Yeah, you need good technology, but you need and good people. It's, you know, if you bad people, good technology isn't going to work, and bad technology, good people isn't going to work either.
Yeah. Ellie, you're on mute.
Apologies, it did that without me knowing. Brilliant. I'm going to move on. We could talk about this topic for hours, I feel, but we've got about 20 more minutes and want to do a Q&A. So let's talk about fixing this massive problem that we've been talking about. So we agree that it's a game of whack-a-mole, that we need a layered approach, that the fraudsters are not getting any consequences, they're not being put in jail, there's lax regulation and governance. So I suppose, how do we start to fix this problem? I'll start with Nitesh and Grigori from our side. How do you think, from where we sit, we can start helping connect the dots and helping the industry?
So we are basically bridging AI and we are bridging humans. So the solution that we developed and recently launched in the UK. So this is the solution with a very sophisticated AI. So when the customer is presenting the document, we're verifying the authenticity of this document, but at the same time, you have a live agent. So you have a person who is asking you right question. So if we talk about APP fraud, social engineering, so in this case, you will be asked, are you doing it yourself? Is there somebody who is telling you what to do? And I know, so these questions are now normally asked when you're trying to set up a new pay on your banking app. So you will be asked thousands of questions and you just need to press okay button. But at the same time, if you have an agent in front of you asking you this question, and the agent also can see what you're doing. So whether somebody is messaging you, whether you with somebody on a phone. So this is the way how we can solve this issue. So we can flag this case as social engineering and tell our customers, banks, that this is the situation in case, and you need to look deeper and further.
So that's one part of the puzzle. So we can flag the fraud. So we can tell bank, you know, there's a fraud, but then they've got to deal with it and they've got to talk to the police, and this seems to be broken somehow. So Ash, how do you guys work with law enforcement, government, to try and, you know, fix this inherent problem that we have?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges that I consistently see coming out of conference talk points, essentially. Regulators, banks, other items that are regulated that are not banks, right? Things like art market participants are also, of course, regulated, as are real estate agents. These problems exist, like multifaceted across quite a lot of society now, where money's being traded. Fundamentally, we all say the same thing, which is that trying to share data is incredibly difficult because of data protection rights. And I'm obviously very supportive of data protection rights. I'm a person, I think that's incredibly important. But fundamentally, we have not hit a point where we're striking the balance between the public good and the public necessity in terms of criminality and protecting people's rights. We're not there. And it's been a 60-year conversation, and we need to find a way to get there. So currently, banks spend a lot of time orchestrating through groups like Gimlet, and similar groups where we can share a little bit of information or share some synthetic information or trends. And those things help. They help to give us a sort of more 360 view of what's happening in the world of fraud. But fundamentally, until we can share information about a customer we know to have committed fraud across a broad swathe of banks, that customer could be conducting the same fraud through multiples, and they could have a whole organized crime ring behind them. The ability to share that information is critical, and it's not really clear right now what we can and cannot do, and that's what needs to become more balanced and certainly clearer.
And what about consortiums and blacklists? Because in previous roles that I've had, we really tried hard to get consortiums where at least the main banks in the UK were sharing blacklisted data, which was hashed, tokenized, encrypted and all sorts. Are those some of the sort of initiatives that you get involved with vendors and things like that to try and start that data sharing?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of obviously vendors in this space, and often people come forward with some exceptional ideas. I find a lot of those ideas fall down because of red tape and bureaucracy. Everybody needs to go through every security, privacy, due diligence element within all of the banks that are going to be part of such a process. Actually, when the first and second money laundering directive came out, one of the ideas posited within them was that if a customer passed due diligence in one place, why couldn't that due diligence be shared across others, so that we could kind of reduce down the element of duplication that occurs? It's not really possible to achieve that in a data protection driven world. And certainly the European Union is moving towards more data protection rather than less, which makes this all the harder. So we're always happy to hear from elements of setting up consortiums or similar, but we will always have this question of, what am I legally allowed to share? And at what point am I maybe playing God to some extent, right? It's this thing of checks and balances on people again, where I want to tell you everything that will help you to spot a fraudster, but is that fair? There needs to be equity for everybody involved in these kind of transactional elements. And it's very difficult to work out sometimes what the right and wrong thing to do is, and where you may have overstepped the mark. That's a real risk. And it's not a risk that we've all gotten on top of yet. So game for the interaction, I often see them fail for reasons that are quite outside of anyone's power, though.
Absolutely. What do you think, Peter? How do we start solving this prolific problem?
Well, I've really struggled not to applaud while Ash was speaking. So I think what she has said is the most important point, but I think there are nuances as well. And like charity starts at home, fraud fighting starts at home. So we talk a lot about collaboration. So we think about collaboration between NatWest, RBS, Barclays, and other banks, and that takes time. Yeah. One thing that I see, because I do fraud reviews for companies, is actually collaborate within your own organization. So I've recently done a lot of work on fraud fusion and shown that the organized crime gangs, the white collar criminals, and the cyber criminals are all collaborating with each other. They're all supporting each other, and they're all changing their shape because of it. So the organized crime gangs, they get a lot of their documentation, their ID stuff from the cybercrime gangs. The cybercrime gangs are learning from the white collar criminals to up the stakes. So if you look at the stats that I'm seeing, fraud in volume is reducing, but fraud in value is increasing.
They're getting
better. So instead of hitting 5 people for £2,000, hit 5 people for 10 grand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that. So that's an important one to me. And what I'm seeing is some smart organizations now are actually creating fusion centers. So they don't just look at fraud, they look at fraud, financial crime, and cyber, and some as well, loss prevention losses, and they bring them under one umbrella. So they're actually collaborating with themselves. So I give
Yeah.
examples. I've gone and done a fraud review for one company, and the head of loss prevention had never met the head of fraud and didn't know what the fraud team did, and vice versa. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we need, so the collaboration. So what I'm saying is there's a great big elephant out there to be worked on. Let's go and have let's
Yeah.
eat it in chunks. So collaboration with your own organization in financial crime risks. I think that is a huge step, and actually sharing data with each other.
Yeah.
And sharing resources with each other. So I think that's one of the things that will change. I think we'll see a hell of a lot more of that. The other one, again, where I'm saying just take a little slice of the elephant, because we'll never catch that elephant. It's been running around since it was a mammoth, and we've been trying to chase it. Yeah, is there are three elements to fraud. It's people love arguing with it, but there's a thing called the fraud triangle, and the elements that are required are some kind of motive for fraud, some kind of opportunity for fraud, and some kind of rationalization for fraud. So most people that commit fraud, they've got a reason that they're doing it. So that might be greed, it might be need, it might be, there might be lots of other reasons for it as well. Some people commit fraud for sport, and then sometimes it's political motives and what have you. So you've got your motive. Your rationalization is how they justify it to themselves. So that can be, things like everybody's at it, which is one of the biggest problems we've got at the moment, because we've had so many fraud issues with governments and large corporations. The person on the street no longer trusts them. Yeah. And if they're doing it, why shouldn't I do it? So you've got the rationalizations. But the other one is opportunity. And if you think about it as an organization, that is the thing that you can do most about. That's the one that is in your power. The other two tend to be within our influence, whereas opportunity is within our power. So how do we prevent fraud? How do we stop fraudsters coming in? How do we stop people that are in, customers becoming fraudsters? Detection, no matter what we do on prevention, it will slip in, or people that will come in absolutely genuine and something will happen that will make them commit fraud. Yeah. So how do we detect it? How do we spot it? And then containment. Once we've actually spotted it, there's two sections. One is let's make sure we were right. Post office example again. So validate or actually show that it is fraud. And how do we contain it? What do we do about it? Do we stop a transaction? Do we report it to the police? Do we do a full investigation? Do we ignore it because it's low value? It's within the fraud tolerance. So prevention, detection, and containment, a proper strategic approach. And I see so many strategy documents that are not strategy documents, the tactical documents. Yeah. So, but it starts with prevention. So it is things like, how do you, identity is a big one. First of all, is it a real identity? There's a hell of a lot of synthetic identities out there. And just for anybody, again, who doesn't know, synthetic identity is an identity that's built to make claims, take out loans or whatever that isn't real or has been manipulated. So is it a real identity? And is the person actually that person? And then the next one is some kind of evaluation of intent. Are they, if they're going to take a loan, are they going to be paying it, or are they intending never to pay it, and so on and so forth. So onboarding, KYC is important. And again, talking about layers, then these things, depending what the risk is, you've got customer due diligence, enhanced due diligence. But you wouldn't want to do enhanced due diligence on everybody. Somebody wants to join the gym. We'll do enhanced due diligence on them. So again, it comes back to that layered approach. So for me, just to summarize, there is fusion. So collaborate with yourself before you try and collaborate with other people. Look after your own organization, and the layered approach of how you deal with it, but also a very, very clear strategy. And it should always include, I don't care what the words are, but it should always include preventing, detecting, and containing, because you need all three to happen for it to work and actually deter people.
Absolutely. And I know we're running, we've got 10 minutes left, but Nitesh, just to finish this round off. So tell us how how ID Now sort of collaborates with industry and government to, again, try and do all those things that Ash and Peter have suggested and try and fix some of these gaps and dangers that we see in our processes.
Yeah, definitely. So we work on both fronts. So number one is definitely our customers, but equally important is regulatory authorities and bodies. So I'll give you a few examples. For example, like with customers, one of the things that Peter said, it's a layered approach, right? You really ask the intention. So one of the mandatory question the expert is asking when there is somebody wants to open an account or sign a loan contract, what is the reason you're opening this account, or what is the reason you're signing this contract? And there itself, the expert can warn the person that, hey, seems like it's an attempt for fraud, I would ask you to cancel the call right away. And we do this despite of knowing, okay, we may not be able to make like this transaction because we also get paid based on these transactions, right? So it's like really preventing it and then informing the bank. So it gets reported internally and externally. We have like a blacklist of such idents. We know, okay, these are the ones that are trying to create attempt fraud, or maybe these are part of the social engineering situations. And that way we work with banks. So the banks or financial institutions, they can opt for the minimum BaFin, which is the body in Germany, which defines, okay, which way you can onboard your customer digitally. And there are different methods. One of them is this video identification, which is we have the expert on the other side with the user. They can opt for this regimented process, like there are certain steps, 10 or 12, depending on your needs. But we also offer some add-ons. For example, if the bank is not satisfied with, let's say, the ID document this person should produce, they can ask the expert to ask the person, hey, can you produce another set of documents, for example, an electricity bill or something? And then the expert is checking whether this document is also genuine. So there's like another layer of a check on top of it. They can also ask some questions which are social engineering questions, like did somebody ask you to open this account, or are you testing, somebody tell you that you're just testing it, or you're just helping them? And there could be multiple types of questions or situations that can happen. And there we really work with the banks depending on the risk appetite. But for the most part, every bank in Germany or every neobank or every loan contract situation, they're always asking for something add-on, like, hey guys, we saw this year. Do you have some recommendation? Or sometime from our side, like, okay, we see most of the time you seem to be one of the banks, or maybe a crypto customer or a loan contract customer. We see a lot of people trying to commit these type of frauds. These type of documents are coming in more. So our QM quality management team would then work with the quality management team of these institutions and recommend them some approach. So that's on the customer side. When it comes to the regulatory body, we are part of these. In Germany, there is a term called Verband. Basically, these are associations, which I think Ashley was also describing a few minutes ago. We are part of these consortiums. So as part of this consortium, multiple banks, multiple financial institutions are also part of them, and they all share knowledge. Data is, again, it's not, I think it's one of the challenging things in the industry, that nobody wants to share data, but at least the know-hows are shared and the best practices are shared. But we also try and influence the regulatory body. For example, recently we have these new changes in the regulation that German authority, the banking institution or the financial institution, also realized, financial ministry, that they have to open up the market a little bit. So they cannot always say you can only use this video-based identification. They have to offer a certain level of automation, and they cannot go for only the German EID scheme, which is German issued ID cards, which are not available to everyone. It's mostly available to German citizens. So you cannot exclude the other European Union or other foreign nationals. So you cannot have this one or nothing approach. And that's where we got involved, and we are right now in the stage of, we are providing the feedback to the regulatory authorities, that even though it seems like it's a very extreme approach that you only allow German nationals to get onboarded, but then you're excluding 40-50% of the other people that are trying to open bank accounts. So the banking industry, loan industry, financial institution, crypto industry, everybody would suffer if you go this extreme approach. So there we are suggesting maybe, if not full automation, maybe also allow partial automation. So certain things where we see last 10 years, these things can definitely be automated. But there are certain things, for example, these social cues or checking the motivation of the person, that should always be done by an expert who's trained on these things day in, day out. Even, I mean, these calls can last for, I don't know, 30, 45 seconds, but those 35, 45 seconds can really make the difference. So not let the machines or automations decide these situations. And not every bank, especially these digital or neo banks, would have the staff or the quality management team, extensive team like we do. So let's find in between approach where you make use of the expertise that we have, and that's basically, so we tackle it from both sides, customers and the regulatory.
Awesome. So we're quickly running out of time. So I would invite anyone, if you've got a question for any of our panelists, please don't be shy. Pop a question in the Q&A. I suppose as we're just seeing if questions come in, just to finish the webinar, if I could go around each of you, we've gone from what is the problem to human machine collaboration to how do we fix it to consortiums to the post office. So if you had one key takeaway, one key thing that you wanted everyone to go away and remember, what would it be? So I'll start with Peter.
Right.
Just one.
One thing, it's a big one, isn't it? But
Yep.
big one is to actually make sure you've got a very, very clear strategy to work with that includes prevention, detection, containment, and how you analyze what you were doing. If you don't do that, then things will never quite gel properly. And it's something that you can return to. You can actually change your strategy if you need to, but a strong strategy and a strategic approach, and then everything builds into that. And certainly, anything I've run, we've always worked to a very, very clear strategy. Because I spoke to one team, they didn't have a strategy because they were too busy doing it, and they sort of, they didn't think it was a good idea. They do have a strategy now. They're a lot more efficient.
Thank goodness. Awesome. Grigori, what about you?
Yeah, my key takeaway that there is no silver bullet when it comes to technologies. So in our day-to-day life, most of us are using ChatGPT. So we know it's an amazing tool. It can help pretty much everybody, but at the same time, it always needs some creativity from people. And when it comes to fraud prevention, it's exactly the same. We need to balance. We need to balance AI and we need to balance human approach.
Excellent. Ash?
Yeah, I think mine is heavily influenced by Nitesh, which is, I think there's a core need for us to look a bit broader, right? We often compare ourselves within the UK, or as Peter said, sometimes we neglect to look inside our own organizations. But there's a whole world out there where people are innovating in other spaces, and it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to start looking at how different countries have started to do this, because that would certainly help us. And in the same way, we could help others when they start to see a bit more fraud, when they have more faster payments.
Awesome. And Nitesh?
Yeah, so my mind would be basically summing up what Peter and Ash said. So Peter on the strategy side, Ash on the using expertise from or know-how from other countries. So I think takeaway would be consider making like fraud prevention as your key strategy and not like one of the things that kind of stays there, but also think about utilizing the potential that other providers like ID Now has. We have a suite of products, suite of experts in-house who are trained on a daily basis how to prevent these frauds. So definitely use the expertise that other providers can offer you to really prevent this fraud.
Brilliant. Well, I don't think there's any questions. If you do have any questions, please send them in after the fact and we'll get someone to answer them. But I really hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. I'd like to thank each and every one of our panelists for such an interesting and engaging discussion. I hope that, you know, everyone goes away and thinks about how we can collaborate and work with one another to really stop this inherent prolific problem that isn't just a monetary damage. It really does, it's so destructive for people's lives. So let's we're all in this fight together. But with that, I will wish you a really good rest of the day, and thank you once again for attending the webinar. Thank you very much.